Greetings, my fellow freedom-loving sovereign thinkers. Thank you for tuning in to LLTV Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy Manchester, South Florida. And today's date is Tuesday, January 23rd, 2021. All right, well, I'm not going to do any rant for the beginning of this show, but narrated an article. Was done by Earl Starbuck. Came out yesterday for the Abbeville blog, which is abbevilleinstitute.org. It's entitled, Judicial Review? No. Nullification. We'll start off here. It says, acts of Congress to be binding must be made pursuant to the Constitution. Otherwise, they are not laws, but merely nullity. But a mere nullity. St. George Tucker. There is no danger I apprehend so much as the consolidation of our government by the noiseless and therefore unalarming instrumentality of the Supreme Court. Thomas Jefferson. Okay, so as a pro-life Jeffersonian, I am constantly frustrated by the endless line of pro-life activists who talk about the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. There are multiple reasons this irks me. For one thing, the Supreme Court will never overturn Roe because its members are dedicated to the preservation of precedent. Add on top of that absurd kangaroo courts that Senate confirmation hearings have become, with their character assassinations and incensed prattling about the vital importance of Roe. And it's clear that the potential justices are being reminded not to tread on that particular landmine if they wish to be confirmed. The brutal character assassination of Robert Bork is ample evidence of this, as are the Frauschel witch hunts against Clarence Thomas and Brett Kavanaugh. My other objection to this pro-life reliance on federal courts are constitutional and practical. To begin with, accepting the incorporation doctrine, the legal justification for Roe, it is decadence. Means accepting the idea that the 14th Amendment incorporates the Bill of Rights against the state governments, including the implied right of privacy as a subsequent right to obtain an abortion. Legal and historical problem with this is that the Bill of Rights were never intended by founding fathers to be applied to the states. There are two primary arguments against the Bill of Rights. The first of these, advanced by men like Roger Sherman, Hugh Williamson, and Theophilus Parsons, was that since the states had their Declaration Bill of Rights, and since Congress has given no authority to infringe on them, a federal Bill of Rights would be redundant and unnecessary, and might even undermine the sovereignty and authority of the states. The sound reason for objecting to the Bill of Rights had to do with its length and scope. Enumerating all of rights protected would be impossible, and therefore would result in an implied surrender of whichever rights they forgot to explicitly protect in the Bill of Rights. Moreover, why said that the government can't do something like restrict free speech or the press if the government hasn't been granted that power to begin with? James Wilson and Alexander Hamilton presented these arguments. Hamilton's easily found in Federalist Essay 84. James Madison actually proposed an amendment incorporating the Bill of Rights against the states. The amendment was voted down. The original preamble to the Bill of Rights also makes clear that the bill was intended to apply solely to the U.S. government, not the states. The convention of a number of the states, having at the time of their adopting the Constitution, expressed a desire in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers. Yet it is raining. That further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added. and as extending the ground of public confidence in the government will best ensure the beneficent ends of its institution. And what was arguably only the Supreme Court ruling have ever got right. Barron versus Baltimore, 1833. Chief Justice John Marshall admitted that the Bill of Rights did not apply to the states. Additionally, accepting the corporation doctrine means accepting the authority of federal courts to overturn state laws. This is not an originalist position and is really the heart of the problem. The corporation doctrine would be a moot point were it not for the doctrine of judicial review. None of the men who ratified the Constitution believed the Supreme Court would have such a power, because the proponents of the Constitution promised it would not. Even John Marshall promised as much at the Virginia Ratifying Convention. Okay, of course, he changed his tune once he became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. That doesn't change the fact that the Constitution was ratified. The legal contract was entered into with the understanding that the court could not strike down state law. Either that was the truth or the Constitution was ratified under false pretenses, in which case it is a fraudulent contract, making it null and void. Thomas Jefferson was vehemently opposed to the idea of judicial review. So he detested judicial review that he refused to admit that the federal courts could strike down federal laws, let alone state laws. As Jefferson wrote to Spencer Rowing in September of 1819, the Constitution on this hypothesis is a mere thing of the wax-in hands of the judiciary, which they may twist and shape in any form they may please. Jefferson also hammered judicial review when writing to William Charles Jarvis in September of 1820. You seem to consider the judges of the ultimate arbiters of all constitutional questions, a very dangerous doctrine indeed, and one which would place us under the despotism of an oligarchy. The Constitution has erected no such single tribunal. Writing on Christmas Day of 1820, Jefferson told Thomas Ritchie that the judiciary of the United States is the subtle corpse of sappers and miners, constantly working underground to undermine the foundation of the Confederate fabric. And finally, Jefferson criticized the judicial review in his letter to William Johnson in June of 1823. The case of Marbury and Madison is continually cited by bench and bar, as if it were settled law, without any adversions of its being merely an arbiter dissertation of the Chief Justice. But the Chief Justice says there must be an ultimate arbiter somewhere. True, there must, but the ultimate arbiter is the people. Jefferson's reference to the people as the ultimate arbiter of such questions is a reference to the state governments, state constitutions, and when it comes to the federal powers, the amendment process laid out in Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. He clearly foresaw the tyrannical oligarchy in the court. The court would become if it was left unchecked. Furthermore, all men who wrote, argued for, and ratified the Constitution made it unequivocally clear that they believed the separate sovereign states retain all powers not delegated to the federal government, and that states have both the right and duty to rein in the federal government when it usurps power or otherwise violates the Constitution. These founding fathers did not view the Supreme Court as the sole arbiter of the interpreter of the Constitution, but rather viewed the states as possessing the power to interpret and protect that document from federal excesses, thereby shielding their power from the tyranny the founders loathed and despised, regardless of what branch initiated the tyranny in question. Moreover, the Supreme Court does not have authority to overturn state laws, because the Supreme Court doesn't have the authority to hear appeals cases from state courts under Article 3 or the 11th Amendment. What legal basis, then, did the court have for hearing Roe? In 1789, Congress passed the first Judiciary Act, Section 25, of which states, the relevant part, and be further enacted that a final judgment or decree in any suit in the highest court of law or equity of a state in which a decision in the suit could be had may be re-examined and reversed or affirmed in the Supreme Court of the United States. There's just one problem with this. Congress has no constitutional authority to expand jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Congress's authority over the judiciary is laid out in Article 1, Section 8. The Congress shall have power to constitute tribunal inferior to the Supreme Court. That is the whole of their authority. Nowhere does Article 3 grant the Supreme Court appellate jurisdiction over cases between citizens of the same state. Nor did it grant the court or the Congress any leeway on the matter. It says, the judicial power shall extend, and then proceeds to explicitly, and precisely lists the case over which the Supreme Court has jurisdiction, even going so far as to differentiate between original and appellate jurisdiction. It must be noted that the court's appellate jurisdiction is explicitly limited to the other cases before mentioned, meaning that Section 25 of the Judiciary Act of 1789 is unconstitutional, not just because Congress has no authority to expand the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, but also because it explicitly contradicts Article 3, Section 2. Roe versus Wade is unconstitutional because the Supreme Court, had no jurisdiction in the case. So, folks, you hear that? Is null and void, Roe versus Wade. So it should have stayed in Texas, period. Interesting. So that's just interesting there. So we'll just keep on going. The Supreme Court has been exceeding its delegated authority since its 1793 ruling in Chisholm versus Georgia, in which the court insisted, contrary to promises made by the ratifying conventions, that states have no sovereign immunity because they had no sovereignty and therefore could be sued in federal court against their will. The states responded with the 11th Amendment. The judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state, or by citizens or subject of any foreign state. Oh, sorry there, folks. Sadly, the court's usurpations did not stop there. Chief Justice Marshall led the court in a flurry of oligarchic power seizures. Despite the opposition of the Richmond junto, the court got away with its violations of the Constitution because Congress had demonstrated an unwillingness to employ the impeachment power to remove partisan justices who legislated from the bench. Among the worst of the decisions was the court 1810 ruling in Fletch versus Peck, in which the court simultaneously asserted its supposed authority to overturn state laws and also declared fraudulent, corrupt, and bribery-riddled contracts to be protected by the contract clause of the U.S. Constitution. Per John Marshall, who wrote the court's opinion, graft is a constitutional right. What sage wisdom! What a sparkling integrity! Truly, ever a man deserved to be one of America's most respected, revered, and influential judge. It was John Marshall. The history of the incorporation doctrine is lengthy and too far large to be discussed in detail here. Suffice it to say that the Supreme Court rejected the ideas in 1873, then reversed course and adopted the idea either with its ruling in Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad Company versus Chicago, or with this decision in Gitlow versus New York, depending on who you ask. While the Supreme Court sadly had no qualms usurping powers from the earliest days of the Union, the incorporation doctrine gave them a powerful new tool which allowed them to justify, move, and usurpations of power from the states and people. These tyrannical usurpations ranged from outright evil to patently absurd. In 1823, statesman, scholar, and former U.S. Senator John Tyler of Carolina pointed out that the Supreme Court's claimed powers to overturn state laws violate the Constitution's guarantee that every state would have a Republican form of government. After all, who have ever heard of a republic whose laws could be arbitrarily overturned by someone outside tribunal, which was wholly unaccountable to the people of said republic? And what about the 10th Amendment's reservation of all undelegated powers to the state's governments and thereof and people thereof? To quote Taylor, the Constitution is susceptible of three distinct characters, which will shed much light on its construction. It ought to be considered as a compact and organization of a government limited by the compact, and as a law in relation to individuals. Its essential stipulation as a compact is the division of power between the state and federal governments. This feature is impressed upon in its strongest lines by the guarantee of a Republican form of government to every state and the reservation of undelegated powers. Can a government be a Republican or even be any government if its powers may be taken away by another government, or if it is responsible not to the people but to a few judges who are themselves responsible to another government? The argument used in the convention now again advanced that the states are subordinate corporations is refuted by the Constitution itself and its guarantee and reservation. Who are the guardians of the compact, the guarantee, and the reservation? The people of each state or the Supreme Federal Court? Is this a court, a state, a Republican form of government for every state, and the receptacle of the reservation? Even criminal is to be tried by his peers. The state governments, to be Republican, must be regulated by the people of each state. How can they be Republican if they may be tried, their laws and judgments annulled, and their powers abridged by a court, which is neither their peer, their master, nor their guarantee? That's a question. To abridge the powers of the state governments is equivalent to the suppression of the state legislators. The Constitution, in accordance with this character as a compact, composes a jury consisting of 3/4 of the contracting parties for its own trial because they were compeers, and neither subjected itself as a compact nor these compeers and mutual guarantees to the power of a few men only to enable to try cases in law and equity. Oh, yeah. In other words, you have two options. Either you, the people of Vermont or California, or Alabama or Tennessee, or whatever state you live in, write the laws by which you are governed through your elected legislators, or the Supreme Court writes your laws for you. Is that self-government? Is that liberty? The latter option sounds like less like a representative republic and more like an unaccountable and unconstitutional oligarchy. If the Supreme Court can abolish state laws whenever they please, they effectively have the power to abolish the state's governments, which the proponents of the Constitution swore would never happen. And the men who ratified the Constitution clearly believed those promises. Either those promises were true or the Constitution was a scam and a fraud, and therefore utterly null, void, and of no force. Even one accept the authority of the Supreme Court to overturn state laws and I don't. The incorporation doctrine still doesn't pass constitutional muster for two reasons. Firstly, the Congress which passed the 14th Amendment and sent it to the states for ratification explicitly debated whether or not the amendment would incorporate the Bill of Rights to the states, and the congressional majority said no. Therefore, original intent explicitly prohibits the incorporation doctrine. The Supreme Court even admitted as much as in the slaughterhouse cases, 1873. Interestingly, in 1875, Congress considered amendment applied to the First Amendment to the states. It failed. If the 14th Amendment applied the Bill of Rights to the states, why was this potential amendment even considered? For full historical details on this, see the 14th Amendment and the Incorporation Doctrine by David Brenner and Government by Judiciary by Raoul Berger. Secondly, according to several excellent historians, including the famed Forrest McDonald, the 14th Amendment was never properly ratified in the first place. See McDonald's A Constitutional History of the United States. And I did a show on that too a few years ago about the 14th Amendment constitutional. Yeah, I did a show on that. So I think it's 5 years ago. So you can look that up if you can. So if a judicial review and the incorporation doctrine are unconstitutional, what is the proper legal recourse? Nullification. The doctrine of nullification is the idea that when the federal government exceeds its constitutional authority, the state governments possess both right and the duty to interpose their power and authority between the people and the tyrannical usurpation of the federal government. As sovereign and equal members of a compact nullifying laws, rulings, and edicts which exceed the delegated authority of the federal government is one of those things sovereign states may of right do. Moreover, because all just powers are derived from the consent of the governed, the right of nullification is reserved to the sovereign states by Amendments 9 and 10. Contra, my undergraduate political science professor, nullification is not a theory dreamed up by John C. Calhoun to defend slavery. It is true that Calhoun advocated nullification most famously during the nullification crisis of 1832 to 1833. But that particular dust-up had nothing to do with slavery and everything to do with unconstitutional federal taxation. Moreover, Calhoun didn't invent the idea of nullification. The rules of nullification run deep, going back to at least to 1765, when the colonies nullified the Stamp Act on the basis that it violated the British Constitution. The most famous example of nullification is probably the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions of 1798, which were written in response to the Alien Sedition Acts of 1798. The Federalist Congress passed the acts, and the Federalist President John Adams signed them into law. Among other things, the acts made it criminal, punishable by fines and imprisonment, to criticize a president or any member of his cabinet, with the exception of Vice President Thomas Jefferson. Such a blatant violation of the First Amendment could not go unchallenged. James Madison responded with the Virginia resolutions, while Thomas Jefferson authored the Kentucky resolutions. Jefferson summed nullification up perfectly when he wrote, "Whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, it's an act are authoritative, void, and of no force." Even the states were not sovereign, and they are. They would still possess the right and duty of nullification for two reasons. Firstly, the right is reserved them under Amendments 9 and 10, regardless of the garbled opinions of John Marshall and Joseph Story. Secondly, the right of nullification is simply a form of resistance to tyranny, and is therefore not merely a legal or constitutional right, but a natural right. At its most basic level, nullification is simply refusal to comply with unconstitutional laws, edicts, and rulings. All defiance to tyrants is rooted in that concept that governments have limits on their authority, beyond which they may not tread because the laws of nature and the nature of nature's God do not allow them to. This is why Benjamin Franklin suggested rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God as the motto of the United States. Thomas Jefferson liked the motto so well that he appropriated it for his own personal seal, jealously and vigilantly guarded by the 9th and 10th Amendments. Nullification is a constitutionally protected natural right, originating in the laws of nature and of nature's God. Even if the states were not sovereign, and they are, they would still possess the constitutional natural right and duties of nullification. Like secession. Nullification is a vital and inherited part of the American political and legal traditions. The judiciary exists to adjudicate. It doesn't have the authority to legislate. If, as St. George Tucker wrote, unconstitutional laws passed by Congress are illegal, how much more illegal are unconstitutional laws pulled out of thin air by the judges sitting on the Supreme Court? The pro-life movement proper legal response to Roe v. Wade is to convince the state governments to nullify the unconstitutional and tyrannical edicts of the power-mad oligarch known as the United States Supreme Court. God grant that will do so with all deliberate speed. There's plenty of sources you can see for yourselves, folks. And Starbucks correct. Nullification is legit. I have to talk about anti-commandeering doctrine. And our rights are inherently natural. Natural-born rights. Little history lesson, too, about nullification. Prohibition era, 18th Amendment. Maryland spearheaded it, and everyone else followed through. And had to be repealed because the federal government didn't have any cooperation with state or local authorities. So, the Biden administration and their lackeys can do wherever they want. Bring out bills that will restrict firearm rights and all these good things. But there's a thing called nullification. Preservation Acts, resolutions, etc. And don't say it can't be done, because if you say it can't happen, you won't do it. You never do it. Those are the truth, the facts, my friends. Hopefully you learned something today. I did too, believe it or not. I enjoy it. All right, that will be it. I thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share us throughout your social media network. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions you want to check out, whatever you do, please send your correspondence to Decorum. Sorry about that. Furthermore, I'll leave the footnotes of this article on my Spreaker page. And if you want to contact me, you can hit me at Loki Luck numbers 03@protonmail.com. Or if you want to send some donations, you keep me at paypal.me or cash.app/Loki Luck number 3. If you want to support the Abbeville Institute, including Mr. Starbuck, that would be greatly appreciated. Always try to give you guys a word of the wise. It's a team effort here. All right, once again, thank you for your time. Please always remember that the demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading the love. And may your guardian spirits be with you.